Did you know the first ever cup of coffee was brewed in the Middle East? In the 15th century, Sufi mystics in Yemen imported coffee beans from nearby Ethiopia and brewed them into coffee for the first time. 6 centuries later, we still drink coffee the same way in the Middle East, and we call it qahwa. This Arabic or Turkish coffee is extremely flavourful, and I bet you've never tried a coffee like this before. To make Arabic coffee, you need Arabic style coffee grounds, which are usually a medium to light colour. Every country roasts their coffee differently. In the Gulf they prefer a dark beige colour, and in other countries they prefer dark brown. The kind we drink in Egypt is usually a milk chocolate colour, which I find perfect for bringing out nutty flavours. The coffee beans are also very finely ground, we're talking almost as fine as flour. That allows the flavour of the beans to really infuse into the liquid and turns the grounds into part of the drink. Now let's make a cup of coffee to explain what I mean. For a good cup of Arabic or Turkish coffee, you more than likely need these special pots. We call this a kanaka in Egypt, and it is a small pot with a long handle that narrows towards the top. When you're making this coffee, you never want it to come to a boil, as that can cause the coffee to split. Having a tall narrow pot means there is less surface area that absorbs heat, and the coffee is less likely to boil. This one is the size of a single 100ml serving of coffee, and this other one makes 2 servings. I will link some of these down below for you to purchase online. If you don't want to buy one, you can try using the smallest pot you have and control the heat by suspending the pot over your stove. For the ingredients, you first need to measure your water. Get a serving glass that is about 100ml in size, which is the typical size for this coffee. Fill the glass up with room temperature water, then add half of it into the pot. For each 100ml of water, I add about 5 to 6 grams of coffee, which works out to about 2 measuring teaspoons or 1.5 heat teaspoons. If you're using a larger cup, calculate and use about 5 to 6% of the liquid's weight. You can also add in a little sugar, which I'd highly recommend for your first time, as this coffee can get really intense. Use your spoon to mix the coffee and water together for about 15 seconds until there are no floating lumps of dry coffee. After that, pour in the rest of the measured water and mix that in as well. That step helps to evenly distribute the coffee grounds, and I find it makes the coffee way creamier. To brew this, place the kanaka on your stove and turn the heat to medium. If you have a gas stove, use the smallest ring, whereas on these electric ones, place it close to the centre. For the first 30 seconds, stir the kanaka every 15 seconds, then after that let it heat undisturbed. After 3 to 4 minutes of heating, you should notice a layer of crema on top, and the pot should be very lightly steaming. Listen for a quiet, weak simmering noise, or watch the foam until it just starts to rise. When either of those happen, immediately remove the kanaka from the heat before it comes to a boil. Now pour the coffee out into your glass in a steady stream so you don't break the foam. In truth, you need to practice a few times before you truly understand what to watch for, as there's just a few seconds between perfect crema and boiling the coffee. If you've done it right, you should have a nice layer of crema on top. If the coffee feels watery, then you've probably boiled it or the grounds aren't fine enough. Let's try this first cup of coffee to get a baseline of what good qahwa tastes like. The flavour is really nutty and there's almost zero acidity in this cup. That's because I'm using good coffee, and your qahwa will only be as good as the coffee grounds you make it from. I got this delicious coffee from a neighbourhood coffee roaster in Cairo who I visited a few months ago. They roast their coffee beans to a perfect milk chocolate shade, then grind them all day long. Neighbourhood coffee roasters like these are a common sight across the Middle East, and most coffee drinkers buy their coffee fresh on a weekly basis. I'd recommend you buy your coffee from one of these places if you get a chance to. Assuming you don't have a neighbourhood roaster, you can also buy Arabic or Turkish coffee online. It's usually pretty decent, but there is a risk of the coffee going stale. Here's some good brands that you can find on Amazon, which I'll link below. You can also make your own coffee grounds at home by grinding whole beans into a powder, though you'll need a very good coffee grinder to do this. Let's try this out using my regular spice grinder. First up, I've got some square mile coffee beans by YouTube's very own James Hoffman. I use these excellent beans in my bean to cup coffee machine every day, and they're perfect for espresso. They are significantly darker than the beans for Arabic coffee though, so I don't know what this will taste like. Grinding them involves a lot of pulsing, and in the end we are left with a decent, albeit very dark looking coffee. Let's put this to the side and make our second experiment. Another option is to roast your own coffee beans at home. I got these green coffee beans from a Yemeni vendor who explained the roasting process to me. First you place a dry pan on the stove over medium-low heat and pour in a load of dry green coffee beans. Spend a few minutes picking out the ugly looking beans and anything that doesn't belong, then turn the heat to medium. It will take about 30 to 40 minutes to roast these beans, and you need to stir the pan the entire time. The beans turn yellow, then toasted beige, and then a milk chocolate brown. At this point you should stop cooking the beans and let them cool, however it's hard to judge their doneness. When the beans are roasted to your liking, get them out of the pan right away to cool down. After pouring mine onto a tray, I took a small portable fan and blew air onto the beans to help them cool. This also got rid of some of the coffee bean skins, which is the shiny layer on the outside of the beans. After cooling them, I ground the beans into a fine powder, which turned out almost identical to the espresso one. I obviously way overshot milk chocolate brown by about 3 to 4 minutes, so keep that in mind if you're home roasting. Apart from the colour, these two home ground coffees are quite a bit coarser than the one I bought, and it's not entirely clear if they'll work in qahwa. I'd recommend that if you do plan on doing this, get a grinder that can make grounds as fine as flour. Before we make this into coffee, let's add some traditional flavourings to our grounds. We often flavour coffee in the Middle East with subtle spices including cardamom, mastic and nutmeg, though people use all sorts of spices. I'm grinding 1 cardamom pod, 1 small piece of mastic and a bit of nutmeg with a few more coffee beans. After grinding, this should be sifted to remove any pieces, then it can be mixed in with the rest of the grounds. Now let's make some more coffees and see whether this worked. First up, the regular one from Egypt. It's been sitting for a while so the foam has disappeared, but it has the signature nutty flavour and velvety texture of qahwa. Next, the home roasted beans. It's a pretty good flavour, slightly acidic, and the coffee grounds are starting to split from the liquid since they're too coarse. For the espresso bean one, it's the same thing texture wise, however this time it tastes a bit too sour. My recommendation is you buy Arabic coffee grounds or roast and finely grind them yourself. One last thing, if you like milky coffee, pour some qahwa over milk to make a cup of qahwa francesa, which means French coffee in Arabic. It weirdly does taste like a French press. If you're more of a tea drinker, it's worth knowing that coffee isn't the only drink we spice, so you should check out this amazing spiced chai that is crazy popular in the Gulf.